when I post ideas on Bitcoin, it is basically for me to try and figure out where I'm wrong, right? Because once I post something, I reflect harder on it than when I don't post it, right? Because I know that I've put the analysis out there and it's there for me to try and figure out, not just at a small degree when I make a trade decision, let to go long for a temporary trade, but when I'm talking about the larger pattern, it's a lot different than. So basically, there's two sides to being a trader, right? There's the analytical side and there's the trader side. So the trader has a different psychology than being an analyst. So when it comes to being an analyst and you're observing the whole pattern, you've got to have some direction as to where this is going. And you've got, using Arias Wave, I've got to have some kind of discernment as to when I'm going to draw the line, as to when I'm going to start expecting things to happen, right? The whole reason I created Arias Wave, right, which is different than Elliott Wave, is because corrections are the most important thing in any chart, right? It doesn't matter if it's Bitcoin or the Dow Jones or interest rates. It makes no difference. But the thing is that I need to know why I'm not going to FOMO into something, right? I don't want to FOMO into shit. I never wanted to, right? I've always had that approach to looking at these charts, and looking back now, I'm kind of glad because it's been kind of crazy in a way to look at these patterns. I did have alternating views throughout this time. I did say at one point this was a B wave and this is a C wave incoming, and I changed my view a few times. But the beauty is that now we have so many altcoins that kind of help sort of highlight where my analysis was wrong and also point me in the right direction. So with the Bitcoin chart and altcoin charts to back me up, it's looking more and more like this is the correct count for Bitcoin. And what that means is that Bitcoin really did top out in 2017, right? And ever since then, it's been in a correction. And it's been in a Arias Wave approved correction, right? Like in terms of understanding, right? A, B, C, D, right? And then obviously the E's coming at some point. But where are we in this pattern? And I believe we are here, right? Because you have to understand that the correction that's here is this whole pattern all over again, right? Because they're fractal patterns. So what that means is within that portion, which I've just drawn as a line, this whole pattern exists in there. So therefore, this being a 5-wave move here, for a D wave, which I'm thinking now, I'm starting to believe it, and I'll show you why in a minute. This whole move here was a 5-wave move and nothing else, right? I tried to make this a D wave at some point. But then I started to look at other charts like Solana and Thorchain, which I'll show you in a minute. And they basically showed me that, okay, even though those charts started here, they still had the same pattern here. And then this part gave it away in those charts. And as to what's happening right now, it's giving me even more proof. And it had to be now that this idea was posted, because I couldn't have done it earlier because it wasn't really coming to me. Now it seems to be quite clear that what we're seeing here is nothing more than the first part of a zigzag in Bitcoin, right? So being right here, So in terms of the larger Bitcoin pattern, we're here. In terms of after this first 5 waves up, this is an A and a B. So we're here. right? So what comes next in this D wave is a C wave, right? So we're going to see a 5-wave move down. I believe that we're almost there before we see that pullback down. I don't know how big that wave's going to be, right? Given that I'm expecting a pretty sizable move in the markets, it might be pretty big, right? And that might be just a blip in Bitcoin's history of patterns. But in the stock market, it might be something a lot worse, if you know what I'm trying to say, right? Like, for example, if you look at the Corona crash, right? That was the extent of the Corona crash. Now, in percentage terms, it was still 62%. Don't get me wrong, it's still a shit show. But that's crypto, right? In the stock market, if you look at the bigger picture, just a blip. But it's still percentage. It's still a percentage move to the downside. So for me, it's not about being wrong or right. It's just about catching it at the right time, making some money. If you can catch it at the right time, you can make money going up and down, right? It's not a big deal if you're a trader. In terms of investment, well, if you're talking about capital gains and all that type of shit when you sell, well, I mean, if you want to deal with that, that's a different story. But in terms of trading, well, you can get away with not having to worry about that, if you know what I'm saying. Not condoning anything, it's not financial advice. But the point is that for a lot of people, they think that this is going to keep going higher. But in terms of the actual pattern, it's just an expanded B wave, right? It got a lot of hype. It broke the all-time high and it went ballistic because of that hype, because of the Trump trade, because of the news, because of this and that. Whatever, right? I don't believe in trading the news. I could definitely see why it moves the market and how sometimes you can take advantage of a short-term trade, but it's not going to be the be all end all of your investment decision, a set it and forget it approach. This is mainly just to gauge where we are. So would I invest for the long term here? No, because my approach would be to invest in something that's going to give me a larger percentage return for my outlay, which wouldn't be Bitcoin. It would probably be some other altcoin, right? But the point here is to just understand the pattern, okay? Because there's different layers to this. Like when I post a video, if it's not a if it's not a long trade idea, then it's just analysis, right? It's just analysis. Don't get it twisted, right? This is not a long trade idea. This is not a short trade idea. This is just analysis. That's all it is, right? Sometimes I post long trade idea like I did with VRA because I could see that it's low risk reward. It's a good risk reward and it's low risk, right? And it's just going to play out as it plays out. It's not going to be a problem, right? And it's going to have a certain take profit target because there's a previous high. Here, there's no previous high, right? So you're really just shooting in the dark. Now, if you're going to understand the pattern itself, well, then AB followed by C means, well, this move is almost done. And why do I think it's almost done? Well, because well, for starters, the A wave of this zigzag is tiny, right? And the only reason I can say that is because I'm assuming it's a B wave, right? Because I would say, okay, this is an A wave, like I thought in the beginning, but then I switched it up. Then I realized that these could be basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sharp correction rather than A, B, C, D, or A, B, C, D, and then E. Like, you just got to be so careful how you dissect these waves because they can really throw off your analysis. At this point in time, I haven't put a long trade idea for Bitcoin really. I've just been basically floating ideas around, like throwing ideas around, trying to stimulate some thought. At this point in time, I just believe this is a glorified C wave, much longer than the A wave. and that can happen. It's happened many times before. Big deal. The point is that 5 waves have almost completed, and you can see it in the structure, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're always going to expect a correction after 5 waves. But in this case, it's the completed B wave. So you're going to see a pullback. Now, what's going to be the confirmation for that? Well, a break of the start of the impulsive move down here, right? So at about 66,000, you break that level, that's it. You've confirmed that this move is not going to go any higher just yet. But there will come a time where we're going to see this pattern mirrored, if not longer, right? So depending on where that correction ends, which would be perhaps somewhere around 38,000, 45,000, something like that. Well, at that point in time, once we see the waves, we can take a trade on that, right? And we can go for a nice long move up. The D wave, right? The D wave is still in play. The D wave has never actually happened yet. Now, just to quickly finish this off, Solana, right? We've got the same thing happening. Now, we don't have the historical data for Solana, but it's following Bitcoin. So therefore, for me, yes, that was a C wave. This is the beginning of the D wave, similar to Bitcoin. We've had an A, B, same thing. The A and the B scenario is happening here. So do I think it's going to pull back? Yes, because this is the first part of a D wave, right? So that D wave will end up looking something like, depending on where the correction ends, right, will be a zigzag, right? Where does that correction end to start the trade? Well, we haven't got there yet. Can't tell you, right? But the clue is, look at this pattern. It's pretty clear, right? Now, down here was a bit funky, right? But it's still basically what it says it is, right? A, B, C, D, E, right? No, sorry, that's not it. Hang on. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then you got your A and your B, right? Now, that's great. Let's look at Thorchain, right? Thorchain, right? Same thing, right? Now, I haven't really labeled this one up, but it's the same thing, right? You've had your 5 wave move, wave C, and you had your first leg up of the D wave, right? So now you're in the corrective portion, which is basically the same thing going on as Bitcoin. You've got your A and your B pattern, right? Like, I haven't done the full in-depth deep dive on this one, but it's similar, right? You can see it. You can see it that you've got a 5 waves up and you're in a corrective portion here, right? Now, how far along that corrective portion is probably very similar to Bitcoin, right? You're still in a correction. You're still going to expect to see another leg up like this once that corrective portion has completed, right? Now, the way that I'm going to do this is that once I see a complete correction here, I'm going to take a long position, and my target will be the same length as the A wave for the D wave, right? It's that type of thinking that is now going into these ideas that I didn't have before. I didn't have that thinking. Why? Because my Bitcoin analysis was off quite a bit because I had confusion over the first wave of this move. What was this move? Was it an A? Was it a 5 wave move? Was it a complete correction? Blah, 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 blah. But now that I've applied this approach to many different charts, I've started to realize once again that these different cryptos, they don't all have exactly the same pattern, right? The Litecoin pattern is a 5 wave move to the downside. XLM, 5-wave move to the downside. XRP, 5-wave move to the downside, right? In Ethereum, it's not even in the same camp because it's a different correction. It's a wave 4, part of a wave 4. It's still an A wave, but it's part of a wave 4 correction. So they're at different stages of their respective pattern, because even though they follow Bitcoin, they're not exactly the same wave. If you identifying them correctly to label them, because labeling them correctly enables you to expect the next move up, because like I told you before, only these waves occur in any correction, right? So if you identify where you are at within this pattern, you can then say, okay, if this has happened, this needs to happen next. If this hasn't happened, this has happened, well, this is going to happen next, right? This is the approach that I take. And that's why I've started to share this information now, so then you can understand why I'm posting the way I'm posting, because it's not always clear cut as to what's happening. But once you collate all these different patterns and make a video like this, you can sort of start to see, hey, there is a guide, there is a bunch of evidence supporting my claims, and they're all performing this action, right? Which is part of a zigzag, or in this particular case, in a wave B. And where are we in that correction? Here we're at wave B. So in Bitcoin, we're at wave B, the top of wave B in that zigzag pattern, right? So that's all it is, right? So here we are, wave B, waiting for wave C to occur. Then once we hit the high, we're going to break down in wave C, etc. So that's the thinking. I'm going to post more about this as we move forward. If you have any questions, please leave them below and I'll try to get to them on the next video.